Without doubts, I think it's by far the best league in the world.
How dare you score like that in the Premier League? Mission accomplished in the Premier League.
Next up, guys, is Chelsea. So I want to start more with their, I think, outgoings when we come to Chelsea, because I feel like while they're adding a lot of pieces, what they've lost gets a bit overlooked. Gally, I want to start with you on this one. I mean, to me, the biggest two are obviously like they're losing two center backs at the same time, despite adding Koulibaly and stuff like that. I feel like it is a huge, huge change when you're changing that much of your back line.
So I'd say Timucin, to me, the bigger loss is Rudiger. Christensen, though he was coming on at times, he's been in and out of the starting lineup. There were times last year that they played Azpilicueta in the back three. They played Reece James against certain teams that had pace on the left-hand side in the back three, even though he's probably their best fullback going forward. So Christensen not as big. I believe Rudiger was the best center back top to bottom in the Premier League last year. And I think that's what spurned his move. I think the Chelsea unrest really led to him leaving because they did that low ball offer for him at the beginning, because Chelsea's old model was not giving players over 30 more than a 1-year contract. And I really think that came back to bite them with Rudiger, because from all accounts, it sounded like he really wanted to stay and take on a bigger role on the squad. So for that, those two big center backs, losing them, I do think they're doing well in the market in replacing them. But, they still have the Sarr kid, the Chalobah kid. They have Thiago Silva, until Azpilicueta leaves. So there are still stocked. But there's got to be some questions when you lose a player like Rudiger, who basically was almost, as disgusting as this is, he was the heart and soul of kind of a heartless side.
I mean, that's the thing. I think Rudiger was the one who kind of carried that back line. I mean, we're obviously not hiding. I'm definitely not hiding with the back wall here. Liverpool fans. So it's kind of like what Van Dijk brings to Liverpool, I feel like. It's one person. I was going to say, you're not hiding it very well either, but Bickler's got the crown on, so he's hiding it really well. But I mean, I felt like, what we have similar to Van Dijk in terms of controlling that back line, leading that back line. It's one thing to have like a good center back, but, somebody who can actually control the back line is 10 times more important. So Bickler, when you look and you see Koulibaly coming in, and I know like there's more names that's being thrown out there. They're talking to a couple other center backs, and like Gally mentioned, they do still have Silva, even though he's aging more and more like I am. What do you make of it? I mean, do you think it's even trade? Because there was a lot of talk about, what a steal he is at basically 42 million. Do you think it's like an even exchange over there, or did they go trade up or trade down?
I don't think it's an even. Look, Koulibaly may come in and be incredible, right? But like the bottom line is I agree with both of your assessments of Rudiger, and I don't think it's a player you just replace. Like when you get to that level of play, in general, you just don't replace a player like that. It's not possible. I mean, there are a few situations where you get extremely lucky and a player comes in and performs above the means and steps in, and maybe we see that happen. But like, I think this is a huge loss for Chelsea, because you took the one position in that team where they had an identity. If you look at Chelsea's team, they had an identity in how they played defense, and they built around that. You knew that you were going to struggle to score against Chelsea, and they've always struggled. Like their struggles last year was around the fact that they just could never find an identity in the final third of the pitch. But like that back line was solid. You have those right and left wing backs that push up, and you have a solid back three. And Rudiger was the heart of that. And he was the linchpin, not only defensively, but on set pieces going forward in the air. Like he was just even offensively, he really contributed. I think that's a huge loss for them. I think they've done about as good as they could possibly do. Koulibaly is going to be, he looks like he's the real deal. We've talked about him for years. All the big clubs have been linked with him. He's not a long-term solution at 31. So, you got 3-4 years maybe, and he's paired with Thiago. So you've got an aged center back pairing. Now, Chelsea's got a ton of kids. If they get Jules Koundé, that would be a huge coup for them, I think, around 55 million.
Done.
Yeah, that he's going to be, I really believe in that kid. I think that he would be their future. And I think that he's got some versatility to his game, and he's got the pace for the Prem. My one concern about him is whether he can hold up physically, which is the opposite of Koulibaly, who I think can hold up physically, but I'm not sure has the pace to play in that back three yet. So that's the major question mark around him. I mean, Chelsea's an interesting side. They've got an owner who's going to spend. Look at what he's done with the Dodgers. They spent another $100 million. My thing is, like, they've got a lot of pieces they got to sort out. They had those windows where they spent coming off their transfer ban. They spent like $150 million in one window just in the midfield. And then Mason Mount ends up being their best midfielder. So it's like, you got to they've got to nail down. I think Sterling helps them sort of rebrand and get some identity up front. I think that's a tremendous buy for them. But they've got to sort out. I mean, they've got a lot of pieces. You look at Ziyech, Werner, there's question marks around whether both those players will be there or not. So there's a lot of question marks, and very similar to Arsenal, where the young core seems to be their most consistent performers, which is not ideal when you're spending what they've spent.
And that's like the odd thing, because they have spent a lot of money, and it's almost like it's a club that's, even though more successfully done than United, for example, just spends the money, gets a bunch of, solid pieces where you can see them, performing well on a team. And then they're hoping like it sticks and this one works out. But then afterwards, kind of like what Bickler is saying, it ends up being your young kid actually is the one that like shines out of that group and stuff. I mean, so I want to ask you about the center backs first, Gally, but right after that, I want you to kind of talk about Lukaku too, because we're talking about, like signing people and then spending a lot of money. And let's face it, like beginning of last season, he was probably not everybody's, but a lot of, pundits pick for, being the top scorer, the golden boot and all that kind of stuff. And then it just ended up being like a Pogba-like disaster in a Chelsea outfit over here. But I want to ask you, Gally, first about the center backs. Even if they do get Koundé, I thought, I know like there was talks about Barcelona trying to snatch it, but seems like Barcelona is trying to snatch everything. They're just out there trying to be a spoiler at this point, it feels like. But if they do get Koundé, how do you see their back line? And then give us your take on the whole Lukaku ordeal.
Yeah. So initially, I think the Koundé deal is done. I think it was late last night they reported that he was actually traveling to England to possibly undergo a medical. He's agreed on $9 million net a year, which will make him, I think, the third or fourth highest paid center back in the Prem, and one of the youngest. So that to me is a done deal. And to Paul's point, I think that's the future of their back line. I was pleasantly surprised with Thiago Silva last year. I think even though he shows that his age, his positioning, and his just knowledge of the game still amazes me when he's in the right spots. And I think in a back three, that gets protected. And I think that will also help Koulibaly's pace issues. And that's kind of saying it nicely. Anyone who remembers us playing against Napoli in the Champions League and Mo running over him, or even more, the embarrassment that was when Sterling basically just tormented him for 90 minutes 2 years prior when he was playing for Napoli then. So I always question whether or not he'd be able to keep up with the pace. So that's going to be really interesting. As far as Lukaku goes, I'm not that surprised it failed. If you go back to your old employer 3 times and think that it's ever going to be different when it never worked out when you worked there prior, you're kind of a moron. And that's what I feel like he did. He's the guy who, was great at Anderlecht, found his way to Chelsea way too young, and then went to West Brom, got success, thought he was going to come back and be a star at Chelsea, ended up playing for a shit club like Everton. I'm sorry, just a club like Everton. And then, he ends up at United, semi-success, goes to Inter, really finds his feet. I always thought Juventus was a perfect fit for him, even way back before he went to Inter, because the Italian game seemed to play perfect into his style and his traits. And he did that. And then he came back to Chelsea and was an absolute flop. So I do think that they will they will get better by letting him go. But this just over exemplifies the Roman Abramovich era as a whole, or error, because they were allowed to make mistakes like paying $300 million for Lukaku and then having to loan him out. I mean, that's how much they spent net over 3 buys, over $300 million on one player. And that's crazy to me. And they didn't sell him for large amounts. So I think they'll get better from that move. I, like Paul, really like the Sterling acquisition. I think he's going to be invigorated. I think he's going to be their best player. And I think he is now their leader because he's really the only winner left in the side.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing with Lukaku. I mean, it was almost like, I don't know if it's a big loss because, I mean, where was he the entire time for the most part, the second half of the season anyway? It would almost be like, you know, he would be trotted out there to say, like, prove me wrong, kids. And it was just like, well, you did it again. Come back and to the side over here. And so I don't think it's a big loss. I'm glad we were kind of like, let's go back to Sterling. I feel like he suits them the way they play a lot better. But at the same time, going back to what you were initially saying, Bickler, doesn't it kind of almost is like writing on the wall that they are going to move some of their players? Because you can only have, I mean, not everybody is United where you load up with wingers and then be like, hey, what are we going to do now? Because it feels like they have the same issue where they just keep loading wing players and can't really decide which horse they want to go with.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that's going to come down to them identifying who their striker is, right? Like what do they want? Like I said, this is like a final third identity and they haven't been able to figure it out, right? Because like, I think at times they played best with Havertz in this false 9, right? When they pushed him in as a false 9. I think that, unlike, you know, honestly, that's going to make a lot of sense if you've got Sterling, because you want Sterling to be able to run in behind. And so, but I mean, that's gonna, like, then do you put Werner in that left wing where he's played before? I mean, if you're gonna have him in the side, I mean, that's where it makes the most amount of sense. But then you got Hudson-Odoi in there that needs time. Gallagher is gonna stay, which will be interesting. It'll be very, very interesting to see how they play. I don't know. It's like I said, it's gonna come down to what they want to do at that striker position in terms of what works for them. But they've got a lot of pieces. They got to figure out that they spent a lot of money on in the midfield. I mean, that really goes back all the way down to Chilwell, who they spent like a record-breaking fee on, who's come in and been hurt most of the time. So like they've got a lot of. I think that's where they're actually in a good spot. Is they've got a lot of pieces that they can dismantle and sell off, right? So like, it's interesting because I see them in this window. They spent £100 million and not really recouped anything yet. But they've got a lot of pieces that they can shift around and recoup that money and sort of reinvest into the squad.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think they got to figure out, and that was the issue. I think Lukaku did not fit what they wanted to do. And I thought Timo would. See, that's like an interesting name. I want to get your take on Gally because obviously he was rumored a lot in terms of coming to Liverpool. And so we, you know, researched him a lot back then. And, you know, we watched him a lot in the past. And I was actually one of those people who was kind of like looking forward to Liverpool getting it. And I still believe if he did come to Liverpool, we would make a lot better use of his pace and his skills as opposed to what it's almost like Chelsea took him and then just tried to put him in a different role that he could not adjust to, plus adjusting to the league at the same time. So it kind of like screwed him up. And once their confidence goes as a striker, it goes downhill really fast.
Yeah, especially a striker who isn't known for his world-class finishing. He's known for creating 10 opportunities and making 2. So once your confidence goes, those 2 become a lot harder to make, as we've seen, because he's had some of the great misses of all time. And he's only been there for 2 campaigns. To be fair to him, he was purchased during the time when Frank was there, and then Tuchel came in, and Tuchel clearly does not rate the style of play that he has for his setup, because he only gets to play in primarily, you know, when they're on the counter. I've seen a little bit of Chelsea's preseason. They've been playing a lot of 4-3-3. It looks like they really feel like their best attack is going to be Sterling, Havertz, and Mount as a front 3. And I think that's more about getting Mount out of the midfield to possibly open up room for more minutes for Gallagher and Ruben Loftus-Cheek, who Tuchel clearly loves because he gave him a lot of minutes as he got healthy last year in the second half of the campaign. I'm with Paul, though. I think Pulisic, Ziyech, I think N'Golo Kante could move if the right offer came in for him with only 1 year left. Jorginho, and I think they would open the door, pack the bags, and fly Werner to wherever was willing to give them a fee. Because I think they paid so much for him and they've seen some of the flashes. And he's one of those players I just think he has to be playing because he needs lots of opportunities. He's not a last 10 minutes come on and win you a match. You know, and I feel like that's why he won't fit there. The one guy I would say, we've seen him on the screen a couple times, Gallagher is staying. You know, they rejected a $35 million bid for Broha, the kid who was on loan at Southampton. And supposedly Tuchel absolutely loves him and has told him there is real opportunity for him to fight for the job. I think Havertz starts the season as the striker with Broha as his deputy. But I think there's a chance that Broha at some point during the year starting in the middle for Chelsea if they don't buy a striker by the end of the window.
Yeah, they do have. I think it's a team that's going into the season, at least, you know, to an outsider, and I think their own fans, with a lot of question marks because there's so many players out there. I mean, you just threw out another like a really solid player name in like Gallagher. I mean, there's so many names out there. But you feel like a lot have to eventually go for one to get some of the money back, and for two, I don't think a lot of these players are going to be happy with that role of being like a rotation guy and stuff like that. Who do you expect to move out, Bickler? If you were a betting man, which you are, I don't know if you're going to bet on this one, but who would you bet on moving on from Chelsea once the season starts will no longer be a Chelsea player?
I think Ziyech is the one that's like probably the first. That's my first. I would not be surprised to see Azpilicueta go. I could see that happening. Werner, if the fee's right, I think would go. So those are probably my three most probable, but I think Ziyech is the one that's sort of nailed on. Like, I feel like he's got to move. I think that's got to be a priority move for them because I still think they can get most of what they paid back for him. And I think there's got to be a priority in freeing up room in the midfield for the young guns.
That's what I was going to ask you because Gally brought up an interesting point with Conte, especially with 1 year left on the contract. Would you think they would want to cash on a player like that? Because, I mean, he would hold a lot of value to a lot of teams, really. I mean, the dude is still, I know he's not as reliable health-wise as he was earlier in his career, but, I mean, I love him as a player.
They could. I mean, it just depends. Like, it really depends on what formation they end up settling into, right? Like, if they continue play with a back three and a 4 in front of it, they're probably going to need them. But like, you know, Gally said, it looks like they're shifting to a 4-3-3. And in that case, that, you know, that sort of lessens the necessity for him when you've got Jorginho. You've got Kovacic still, who can play a holding role. So you've got a lot of pieces that probably need time that are younger that you've invested in. So yeah, I think that lessens. I love Conte. He's nowhere near where he was 3 or 4 years ago, obviously, but I think it makes a lot of sense from a personnel standpoint. And really, like, I think a lot of what Chelsea does and a lot of their success this year hinges on Tuchel's ability to manage that locker room with those personalities, rotate that squad in a way that's efficient, that keeps them fresh and everyone happy. And that's a lot harder than, you know, we could talk about that, but that's pretty hard in practice when you've got they've got this really dramatic mix of established veteran stars and young promising kids that need time. And the collision of those two worlds, when you have such a dramatic sort of contrast in those two with not a lot of pieces in the middle, that gets really difficult.
So, Gally, what we said, a lot of questions. It's that time to give some answers.
Yep.
I mean, last year it started hot for them, and it was, you know, everybody was like, "Oh, it's a 3-man race," and then after the second corner, they kind of like started falling off. How do you see them? Where do you see them ending up this year? Do they compete for the title?
No. Amazing that a club that won the Champions League 2 years ago, in really impressive fashion, to be fair, have so many questions going into a Premier League campaign with the investments they've made since. I'm going to say they're the same team as last year. They finished this campaign somewhere between 4th and 6th, and that's going to depend on how the players gel and how that back line goes. But if I were making a prediction, it would be this. If it doesn't go well to start, Tuchel's not there by 2023, because this guy isn't a guy who plays well with management, never has. Got fired at Dortmund, got fired at PSG, was a serial winner at both. Came here and only got an 18-month contract because they knew the asshole they were hiring. And that's his personality that makes him great. And I think he's the type of guy, he walks if he doesn't like the way it's going. And I think Todd Bowley, the Dodgers owner who now owns them, is the type of guy who wants to be known for their success. And I think Tuchel's the type of guy who wants to run the show his way. So I'm going to say 4 to 6, but if it starts going the other way, they could have some big problems and it could be a tough year for Chelsea.
Yeah, he's a lot like Conte in that way, you know, the way I view him. Like, he's like my way or the highway. And I think he has, when you have his resume, I guess it's, you know, a lot easier to be able to do that and say, if you guys don't like it, oh, well, kind of thing, because you know you're going to get a lot of other great offers. Because I really think he's a great manager. I mean, you got to bear in mind, I know they kind of like fell off last year, but there was a lot of drama to control aside from, you know, like the football on the field. So where do you have him finishing, Bickler?
Very similar. I have them 4th. I could see them finishing 5th. I think there's just too much up in the air, and there's not enough cohesion and stability right now to push them up higher. I think they've got too much quality to finish 6th when I look at this table. But I mean, yeah, I think 4th or 5th. I think they'll figure it out in 4th. I would also not be surprised if Tuchel walks. Or I could also see Tuchel getting the rug pulled. Like, so Bowley as an owner, he doesn't put up with a lot of shit. And I think that, like, if he needs to make a statement, he's somebody who likes a statement. And I think that he could surprise everyone. And if things aren't going well and there's conflict in the boardroom upstairs with the suits, I could see it happening, man. I really could. And I think, like, you know, a lot of us were like, oh, like Abramovich is gone. Like the Chelsea spending spree is over. But like from an owner standpoint, he's a good owner in the fact that he's going to spend money for Chelsea and he's going to do whatever it takes to make them a winner. I expect there'll be a learning curve for him, as there is for most American owners coming into the sport. But he's a smart enough dude that he will put the right pieces around him, very much like what happened at Liverpool. And I think if you're a Chelsea fan, you've got every right to be excited about new ownership, because I think he's going to do it, and he's going to do it the right way without blood money. And I think, I think they'll finish 4th. But I think, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of cleanup they have to do. I think it will happen. I think they finish 4th. But also, if Tuchel walks and that's going to put an adjustment period further back, and so they could drop a spot or two. 6 seems too low for them, but you never know.